The winter of 1817 arrived early across the Arizona frontier. Cold winds swept through the lonely valleys beneath Red Mesa, carrying dust one day and frozen rain the next. Most folks believed only desperate men chose to live that far from civilization. Elias Mercer had stopped caring what people believed. For nearly 4 years, the widowed rancher had lived alone on a weathered cattle ranch nearly 20 miles from the nearest settlement of Dry Creek. His mornings belonged to feeding horses, repairing fences, and watching the sunrise paint the cliffs a deep crimson. His evenings belonged to silence. Silence had become the only companion that never betrayed him. The old cabin still carried traces of the life he had once known. A faded rocking chair rested beside the fireplace. Copper pots still hung exactly where his wife had placed them years before. He had never found the strength to move them. That evening, the sky darkened faster than usual. A bitter wind rattled the shutters while Elias finished stacking firewood beneath the porch. His horse, Ranger, suddenly lifted its head and snorted toward the northern trail. Something was wrong. Animals noticed danger long before people did. Elias rested one hand on the worn handle of his rifle and listened. At first, he heard only the wind. Then came another sound. A wagon wheel. Not rolling. Dragging. Slow. Broken. He stepped into the open yard, his lantern throwing long shadows across the frozen ground. Far beyond the cottonwood trees, a shape appeared through the dust. A single wagon leaned dangerously to one side as it crawled toward the ranch. One mule struggled to pull it while the second harness dragged empty across the ground. Whoever drove it was barely keeping it together. The wagon finally stopped 50 yards from the cabin. Then nothing moved. Elias waited. No one climbed down. After several cautious moments, he walked closer, rifle lowered but ready. Inside the wagon sat a young woman wrapped in a torn brown blanket. Her face was pale beneath layers of dust, and one arm was tied with a blood-soaked bandage. Around her huddled 6 frightened children, ranging from a boy no older than 4 to a girl who looked nearly 15. The oldest girl reached for a small hunting knife. "Stay back," she warned. Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. Elias admired that. Fear often revealed the strongest hearts. "I'm not looking for trouble," he answered calmly. "That's what the last man said." The words lingered in the cold air. Elias slowly set his rifle against the wagon wheel and raised both hands. "If I meant you harm," he said, "I'd have never put my gun down." The children exchanged uncertain glances. The wounded woman finally opened her eyes. She tried to sit upright but immediately collapsed against the wooden seat. "We don't have money," she whispered. "I'm not asking for any. We can't pay. I didn't ask for payment either." For a long moment nobody spoke. The youngest boy coughed violently, his tiny shoulders shaking beneath an oversized coat that clearly belonged to someone else. Elias noticed blue lips. The child was freezing. Without another word, he removed his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around the little boy. The oldest girl watched every movement. "Why are you helping us?" Elias looked toward the darkening sky. "Because another hour out here, and none of you will see tomorrow." The woman closed her eyes. "My name is Clara Whitmore," she said weakly. "We've been traveling for 8 days." "From where?" "New Mexico." "And where are you headed?" She hesitated. "We don't know anymore." Those words struck Elias harder than he expected. He remembered saying nearly the same thing after burying his wife. When grief stole your destination, every road felt equally empty. He climbed onto the wagon and carefully lifted the unconscious youngest child into his arms. "There's stew warming inside my cabin," he said. "It isn't fancy, but it's hot." The children remained frozen with uncertainty. The oldest girl tightened her grip on the knife. "What if this is a trick?" Elias smiled faintly. "If it were," he replied, "I'd be the poorest outlaw in the territory." For the first time, one of the younger boys laughed. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Clara nodded slowly. "We'll trust you." Together they crossed the snowy yard toward the warm cabin, leaving behind broken wagon tracks already disappearing beneath the wind. None of them noticed the distant rider standing high on Red Mesa, watching, waiting, and smiling. The shadow from Red Mesa. The cabin door closed against the rising wind, and for the first time in many days, Warmth surrounded Clara Whitmore and the 6 children. The smell of venison stew filled the single-room cabin while logs crackled inside the stone fireplace. The younger children stared at the steaming bowls as though they had forgotten what a hot meal looked like. Elias Mercer served everyone before filling his own plate. Clara noticed. "You feed strangers before yourself?" He shrugged. "My father always said a hungry child deserves the first bite." The youngest boy devoured his meal so quickly that the oldest girl gently slowed him down. "Easy, Tommy," she whispered. "Nobody's taking it away." Those simple words revealed more about their past than any long explanation ever could. For the next hour, the cabin remained quiet except for spoons scraping against tin bowls and the occasional sigh of relief. Outside, the storm strengthened. Snow mixed with dust, creating a strange gray curtain that swallowed the ranch. Elias stepped onto the porch for one last look around. His instincts rarely failed him. Something still felt wrong. Fresh hoofprints. Only one horse. They stopped near the ridge overlooking the ranch before turning away again. Someone had been watching. When he returned inside, Clara had managed to stand beside the fire despite the pain in her shoulder. "You've seen something," she said. Elias nodded. "We're probably not alone." The room instantly grew tense. The oldest girl, Emma, instinctively gathered the younger children closer together. Clara closed her eyes. "I prayed they wouldn't find us this soon." Elias looked at her carefully. "Who?" She remained silent. Not because she didn't trust him. Because speaking their names made them feel real. After several long moments, she finally answered. "The Blackthorn Riders." The fire seemed to crack louder. "I've heard rumors," Elias admitted. "Bandits. Worse. They don't rob people. They force families off their land." Emma spoke for the first time. "They burned our farm." The words were steady. Too steady for a 14-year-old girl. "They shot our horses. They took everything." And when Mama refused to leave Grandpa's land. She couldn't finish. Clara gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "They murdered my father." Silence settled over the cabin. Even the younger children stopped moving. Elias lowered his head. He had fought desperate men before. He understood greed. But cruelty without purpose was something else entirely. "They wanted the silver beneath our valley," Clara continued. "My father wouldn't sell. So they decided to erase us instead." Elias walked toward the window. Beyond the frosted glass, darkness had swallowed the entire ranch. "If they tracked you here, they won't stop." "I know." Clara looked toward the children sleeping beside the fireplace. "They've been hunting us for nearly 2 weeks. They don't want witnesses." A heavy knock suddenly echoed across the cabin. 3 sharp strikes. Everyone froze. Tommy dropped his wooden spoon. Emma quietly reached for the hunting knife tucked inside her boot. Elias picked up his rifle without saying a word. Another knock. Slower this time. "Elias!" A familiar voice called through the wind. "It's Ben Holloway." Elias relaxed slightly before opening the door. Ben Holloway, an aging trapper with a thick gray beard, hurried inside carrying a lantern nearly extinguished by the storm. "You've got company," Ben observed. "I figured as much." Ben brushed snow from his shoulders before lowering his voice. "I counted 4 riders crossing Red Mesa." Elias exchanged a glance with Clara. "They're asking folks in Dry Creek if anyone's seen a broken wagon." Clara's face turned pale. Ben finally noticed her frightened expression. "These the folks they're looking for?" Nobody answered. He didn't need one. "I feared as much." Ben pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. "I took this from the general store before leaving town." Elias unfolded it. At the top was a rough sketch of Clara. Beneath it, large letters read, "Reward, $500. Information leading to the capture of Clara Whitmore and 6 accompanying children. Signed only with a blackthorn symbol." Ben spat into the fire. "No sheriff's seal. No judge. Just hired killers pretending they've got authority." Clara stared at the paper. "They've put a price on children." "They've put a price on silence," Ben corrected. Elias slowly folded the notice. "They won't get either." Ben looked directly at him. You know what this means. I do. If they discover you've hidden them, they'll burn this ranch too. Elias glanced around the cabin. At Tommy sleeping with his bowl still in his lap. At Emma pretending to be fearless. At Clara struggling to stay strong for children who weren't all her own. Then he looked back at Ben. I buried my family years ago. I'm not about to watch another one disappear. Ben smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Outside, the wind suddenly stopped. The silence was almost unnatural. Then Ranger, Elias's horse, screamed from the stable. A single gunshot shattered the night. Every lantern flame trembled. Elias rushed to the window just in time to see shadows moving between the trees. Not 4 riders. At least 8. The Blackthorn riders had reached the ranch, and they were closing in. A home worth defending. The first gunshot echoed across the valley, and every child inside the cabin jumped. Elias wasted no time. Ben, he ordered, take the children through the cellar door. Stay there until I come. Ben nodded immediately. Emma helped gather the younger children while Clara struggled to her feet. I'm not hiding, she said firmly. You can barely lift your arm, Elias replied. I can still stand. Before either could argue further, another shot blasted through the darkness. A cabin window exploded, scattering glass across the floor. Outside, a voice called through the wind. Elias Mercer, we know you're in there. Hand over the woman and the children, and we'll leave your ranch standing. Elias quietly loaded another cartridge into his rifle. I've never liked taking orders. The voice laughed. You've got 1 minute. Ben guided the children toward the hidden trapdoor beneath the pantry while Emma looked back. What about you? Elias smiled. I'm right behind you. She wanted to believe him. Clara placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. Go. Reluctantly, they disappeared below the cabin floor. Only Elias and Clara remained. She reached into her coat and produced a small revolver. You've been carrying that the whole time? My father insisted every daughter learn to survive. Elias nodded approvingly. Stay behind the stone chimney. The front door suddenly burst open. 3 armed riders rushed inside. The first barely crossed the threshold before Elias fired. The outlaw fell instantly. The second man raised his rifle, but Clara's revolver cracked through the room. His weapon flew from his hands. The third rider dove behind a table. Outside, more horses thundered into the yard. There are too many, Clara shouted. There always are, Elias answered calmly. He kicked over the oil lantern. Flames raced across the wooden floor between them and the remaining outlaw. The man stumbled backward, coughing through the smoke before fleeing outside. Within moments, the cabin filled with firelight and thick black smoke. We have to leave, Clara cried. Elias nodded. The back door. They escaped into the freezing night as flames climbed the cabin walls. 8 riders surrounded the yard. At their center sat a tall man dressed in a long black coat. A silver thorn was carved into the handle of his pistol. So, he said with a crooked smile, you must be Clara Whitmore. And you're the coward who hides behind hired guns, she answered. Several riders laughed nervously. The leader's smile disappeared. My name is Victor Kane. You've caused me enough trouble. Elias stepped beside Clara. Looks like your trouble just doubled. Victor drew his pistol. Before he could fire, a loud whistle echoed from the ridge. Another answered. Then another. Suddenly, lanterns appeared across the surrounding hills. Dozens of them. Victor looked around in confusion. Horsemen rode down from every direction. Ranchers, trappers, farmers, men and women from Dry Creek. Even old Miss Eleanor Briggs, who owned the bakery, arrived carrying a shotgun nearly as old as she was. Ben grinned. Told you I stopped by town. Victor frowned. You brought an army? No, Ben replied. We brought neighbors. Sheriff Thomas Hale rode to the front of the crowd. Unlike Victor's false notices, his silver badge reflected the firelight. I've spent 6 months gathering evidence against the Blackthorn riders. He pointed directly at Victor. Tonight your trail ends. Victor fired first. Chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed across the valley. Horses reared. Men shouted. But the battle ended almost as quickly as it began. The townspeople outnumbered the outlaws 3-1. Several riders surrendered immediately. Others fled into the hills. Victor attempted to escape toward Red Mesa. Elias mounted Ranger and pursued him through the narrow canyon. The chase ended at the edge of a steep cliff. Victor pointed his pistol. "You should have minded your own business." Elias remained calm. "No. I finally found something worth protecting." Victor pulled the trigger. The hammer clicked. Empty. Before he could react, Sheriff Hale and 2 deputies arrived behind him. Victor slowly lowered his weapon. His gang was finished. By sunrise, every surviving outlaw had been placed in irons. The burned cabin still smoldered, but the ranch itself remained standing. Weeks later, neighbors from Dry Creek arrived with wagons full of lumber. No one asked for payment. Together they built Elias a larger cabin than the one he had lost. The children planted wildflowers beside the porch. Ben carved a new wooden sign that read, "Mercer Ranch." Emma smiled as she nailed it into place. "It finally feels like home." Clara stood beside Elias, watching Tommy race across the pasture with laughter that no longer sounded frightened. "You gave us a future," she said quietly. Elias shook his head. "No. You brought life back to this place." That autumn, Sheriff Hale officially returned the Whitmore family's land to Clara after proving the Blackthorn Riders had stolen it through fraud and violence. She chose not to leave. Instead, she and the children made Mercer Ranch their home. The empty silence that had haunted Elias for years disappeared beneath laughter, horses, and the sound of busy mornings. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind Red Mesa, Tommy asked the question everyone had been quietly carrying. "Mr. Mercer, are we still strangers?" Elias looked at the faces gathered around the supper table. Faces that had once arrived frightened, hungry, and homeless. Then he smiled. "Not anymore. We're family." Outside, the prairie wind rolled gently through the grass. For the first time in many years, Mercer Ranch no longer stood as a lonely place at the edge of the frontier. It stood as proof that sometimes the strongest families were not born by blood, but built by courage, kindness, and the choice to protect one another when the rest of the world looked away. And that story would be remembered around campfires across the Wild West for generations to come.